You are not going to believe what I walked into. I had just come back from a quick weekend trip, nothing fancy, just a couple of days to relax. But the moment I opened my front door, I knew something was very, very wrong. My living room didn't look like my living room anymore. Furniture had been moved. Walls were freshly painted. And right in the middle of the chaos, there she was, Karen from down the street, in full-on HGTV mode, acting like she owned the place. I was frozen for a second, just trying to process what I was seeing. She had tools scattered everywhere. Her sleeves rolled up, and she was barking orders at some poor handyman she apparently hired. I asked her what she thought she was doing, and without skipping a beat, she tells me, get this, that she's remodeling the space so her son can move in. Her son, not mine, not a roommate, not even a relative. Her adult son, who's apparently having a hard time and, in her words, just needs a quiet place to reset. I was stunned. I told her to stop immediately and leave my house, and that's when things took a wild turn. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. Instead, she picked up her phone and called 911 on me, my own house. You might be wondering how she even got inside or why she thought this was okay. Trust me, I've got all those answers, and they only make the story even crazier. This wasn't some harmless misunderstanding. It was a full-on, entitled invasion. And it's not the first time Karen has crossed the line either. What happened? Next, we'll leave you speechless. Yes, the police did show up. Stick around, because the moment they arrived, the situation took yet another twist no one saw coming. So, while we waited for the police to arrive, Karen stood there, acting like I was the one out of line. She kept pacing around my living room, pointing at different walls and saying things like, "I was thinking we could knock this out to make space for a mini fridge." And, "This couch is way too bulky for what my son needs." Like what? Her tone wasn't even apologetic. It was like she genuinely believed this was her right, like she had some kind of say in what happened inside my house. Now, here's where things get even more bizarre. A few weeks back, Karen had been coming around more often. Kata at first, it seemed, harmless, asking to borrow tools, then just dropping by to chat, then offering to help with stuff around the house. I didn't think much of it, but now I realize she was probably scoping things out. I had a contractor over to give me a quote on some minor kitchen repairs, and I'm pretty sure she overheard the whole conversation. That's likely when the idea popped into her head that the house was open for business or something. Her son, by the way, has a reputation. He's in his 20s, doesn't work, and has a bit of a track record for causing trouble around the neighborhood. There have been complaints, broken sprinklers, loud music at night, even a few missing packages. Karen's always had an excuse for everything. He's just misunderstood, she says. The world's too harsh on young men. But none of that explained why she thought my living room was about to become his personal crash pad. As I stood there trying to hold it together, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My spare keys, the ones I kept hidden on the back porch, were gone. And that's when I realized this probably wasn't the first time she'd been inside. The second I realized the spare keys were missing, everything started clicking into place. That sinking feeling turned into full-blown panic. I remembered a weird moment last week when I came home and the back door was unlocked, but nothing seemed out of place, so I brushed it off. Now I'm thinking Karen had been coming and going like it was a timeshare. And the worst part, she didn't even seem the slightest bit guilty. She actually said, "Well, you weren't using the room, and my son really needs a fresh start." Like that was supposed to justify breaking into my house. As the minutes dragged on and we waited for the cops, I decided to grab my phone and record everything. I figured if this escalated, and it felt like it was about to, I needed some proof of what was going on. Karen, of course, flipped out the second she saw me recording. She started yelling that I was harassing a single mother and violating her privacy. Her voice was so loud, I'm sure the whole street heard. But I didn't stop. I knew. Her little performance was just beginning. Meanwhile, one of my neighbors, Tom, came over to see what all the shouting was about. He's lived across from me for years and knows both of us. When I explained the situation, his jaw just dropped. But instead of calming things down, Karen turned on him, too accusing. Him of always taking my side and not understanding what it's like to have a struggling child. That's when Tom told me something I didn't know. This wasn't the first house she's pulled something like this at. Apparently, 2 years ago, she tried something similar with another neighbor who'd gone out of town. The case never went to court, but it got messy. And now here she was, trying it again. I started to wonder just how far she was willing to go this time and whether the police would actually do anything. When they got there, by the time the police finally pulled up, the tension in my living room could have snapped in half. Karen was pacing, arms folded, talking under her breath about entitled homeowners and how the system never protects struggling families. Meanwhile, Tom stayed close, trying to keep things level in case she tried anything else. I had my phone still recording, just in case. 2 officers stepped out and came to the door. Karen instantly switched tones, like flipping a switch. She went from defensive to dramatic. "Thank God you're here," she cried, pointing at me like I was the intruder. "He's harassing me in front of my son's new home." One of the officers raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" he asked. She hesitated. That tiny pause told me everything. Then she started spinning a story about how I gave her permission weeks ago to help with repairs, and how her son was set to move in next week as a house guest. She said I was going back on my word out of spite, and that this was all just a misunderstanding between friends. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just trespassing. She had built an entire narrative around it. When I explained my side, the officers asked to see proof of ownership, which I had no problem showing. But then came the twist. Karen had a spare key in her purse. She claimed I gave it to her. I almost laughed, but I could tell the officers were trying to figure out who was lying. And that's when Karen made it worse. She stepped toward me, waving the key like a trophy, and said loud enough for the officers to hear, "You said your place would be better with someone actually living in it." That sentence changed the energy in the room. One officer stepped between us. The other radioed something into his shoulder mic. I could see Karen starting to panic, realizing she might have gone too far this time. But we weren't even close to the end yet, because just then, her son showed up at my door. Backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones in, completely unaware of the chaos waiting inside. The second Karen's son stepped through the doorway. Everything got even messier. He stopped short when he saw the police, me, Tom, and his mom in a full-blown standoff. He pulled out one of his earbuds and asked, "What's going on?" Like he'd just walked into a surprise party. Karen's whole demeanor shifted again. She rushed over to him like some heroic mother under attack. "Baby, don't worry. This is just a misunderstanding," she said, hugging him tight. But the way she looked at me over his shoulder wasn't motherly. It was a warning. One of the officers asked the kid if he knew where he was. And without missing a beat, he said, "Yeah, my new place. Mom said she worked it out with the owner." That was it. I couldn't keep quiet. I told the officer, again, that this was my house, my furniture, and definitely not anyone's new apartment. But then came the twist none of us were ready for. The son reached into his backpack and pulled out a lease agreement, a printed, signed lease with my forged signature on it. My stomach dropped. Karen smirked. "See?" she said, waving the papers like it sealed the deal. "He has a right to be here. You can't just kick him out now." I stared at the document, completely speechless. I had never seen it before, but it had my name, my address, and even a fake phone number at the bottom. It looked official. I looked at the officers, who now looked a lot more serious. The officer holding the lease asked, "Did you sign this?" I shook my head, too angry to speak. Karen stood tall, clearly thinking she'd won. Tom leaned over and whispered, "This is next level." And he was right. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore, it was fraud. And if they believed her, I could actually be the one in legal trouble. But before I could say another word, one of the officers got a call on his radio and, whatever he heard, made him pause. Turn to me and say, "We need to talk outside. Now." I followed the officer outside, my heart pounding. I had no idea what he was about to say, but from the look on his face, something had shifted. He walked me a few steps away from the door, lowered his voice, and said, "We just got a call from dispatch. A neighbor reported seeing someone sneaking around your backyard earlier this week. They gave us a description, and it matches Karen's son." My stomach turned. "We also ran a quick background check on him after you mentioned the spare keys missing," he continued. "Turns out he's already on probation for breaking and entering." That changed everything. The officers headed back inside, and I followed, staying quiet. Karen was still going on about her son's rights, waving the lease like a victory flag, but this time the officer cut her off. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe your son entered this home without consent and with the use of stolen property. You need to stop talking and step aside." Her smile vanished. Then the officer turned to the son. "You're currently on probation, and this lease appears to be falsified. We're going to need to take you both in for further questioning." That was the moment Karen's mask finally cracked. She started shouting again, blaming me, the system, even the officers, until they read her rights. Her son didn't even fight it. He looked more annoyed than scared, like he'd been through this before. As they escorted both of them out, Karen screamed over her shoulder, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But honestly, I felt relief more than anything. It was finally over, so I thought. Just when I walked back inside to take a breath, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my smart home app Motion detected in the basement. I never even showed Karen the basement key, which meant someone else might still be down there. I stood frozen for a second, staring at the basement alert on my phone. Every logical part of me wanted to believe it was just a glitch, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't take chances. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way down the basement stairs, heart racing. I half expected Karen's son to have some buddy stashed down there, or worse. But when I reached the bottom, I found what actually triggered the alert. A stack of my moving boxes had been opened and tossed around. Not stolen, just searched. As if someone had been looking for something. That's when I found an envelope wedged behind the shelf with my name scribbled on the front. It was from my contractor, the same one I'd been working with weeks ago. Turns out he had left it there after finishing some electrical work, along with a duplicate estimate and a note saying he gave a copy to the nice lady who said she was your assistant. Karen had been planning this even longer than I thought. The next day, I handed everything to the police: security footage, the fake lease, the note from the contractor. With all that, they had enough to press charges. Both Karen and her son were facing real consequences now. Not just a slap on the wrist. It took a few weeks to get the locks changed, clean up the mess, and fully secure the house. But through it all, I learned something important. Never ignore your gut, even when things seem harmless, because entitled behavior like what Karen pulled can escalate fast. And if you're not careful, you might find your own home slowly slipping out of your control. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that are almost too wild to believe.